Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Stephanie Will, and I am the Mental Health Services Program Manager here at Montgomery College. And I'm here today to do a little quarantine cooking with everybody. I'm really passionate about cooking. I am not a professional chef by any stretch of the imagination. I'm also not a dietitian or a nutritionist, but I am a mental health counselor. And I, again, am a home cook, and I really enjoy coming up with new and different dishes and everything. And one of the things that we can really do for ourselves during this time period is to make sure that we are eating healthfully and mindfully. So one of the ways that we can do that is by making delicious and hearty foods. Today, what I'm going to be making with you guys is a one skillet Mexican beef and rice dish from a blogger called I Wash and You Dry. It's an easy, pretty simple one pot meal. Again, I take no credit for it. It is from a blog that is not mine. But I did want to share it with you because I do love Mexican food, even if it's not authentic Mexican food. It's still very tasty and I very much enjoy it, so I wanted to share that with you today. So when it comes to cooking, one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves is make sure that we have everything out and we know we have everything before we start cooking. I've definitely done that before where I've started on a recipe and then realized about halfway through I was missing one of the ingredients. So definitely wanted to make sure that I have all of my implements out so I'm not scrambling, I'm not looking for where everything is as I'm trying to put everything together. And that just makes the whole process a lot less stressful for me and more enjoyable. So today this recipe is going to include some beef stock, taco seasoning. The recipe calls for fire roasted corn. The grocery store did not have that, so I'm just going with regular sweet corn. The diced tomatoes, it called for without green chilies, but this is what I had in my house, so that's what I'm going with. It also called for long grain rice, but due to quarantine, the supply was limited, so I grabbed what I could. I use 93% or 97%, 93% lean ground beef, just because it's a little bit less fat to pour off, so it's a little bit easier in my opinion. But you can use whatever is your favorite percentage fat in beef, and some Colby Jack cheese. Again, I have my big skillet out and my stirring spoon and lid already, as well as my knife to cut up an onion, to measuring cup to measure the beef broth as well as the rice, and a grater to shred my cheese. So me personally, in addition to getting everything out and ready to go before I start cooking, I also like to make sure everything is chopped and prepared before I start cooking as well. I do not chop fast, so I hate when I've got one thing in the skillet and all of a sudden I feel very rushed, and then things start burning and I haven't gotten the onion chopped yet. So to make my life a lot easier, I like to cut up my onion, make sure all my cans are opened, so that way it's just kind of dump and go when I do get to the actual cooking part. So I'm going to show you a little bit about how to chop up an onion. Now for onions, some people like to use protective eyewear or to put your onion in the freezer for a little bit so it doesn't make you cry. I just kind of suffer through. It's a relatively small onion that we're putting in today, so it shouldn't be too big of a problem. So we have our onion here. Again, it's just a small-ish yellow onion. I had it in the fridge already, so I didn't have to go out and buy anything special. If you've been to the mobile markets in the last month prior to all the quarantining beginning, there were tons and tons of onions there. So if you're able to stock up, this is a great use for some. So now what you want to do is hold the onion by the root ends, and you're going to cut off the very top portion of the onion. And then without cutting off the root end at the bottom, you're going to cut the onion in half to make it more sturdy when we're going through and cutting it. We want to peel off the top layer to make sure we don't have any of that kind of papery onion skin getting into our dish. That was not very tasty. Depending on your onion, how long it's been, in the fridge, it might be a little bit longer. So let me get this out of the way. See, one thing I didn't do is I didn't have the trash can nearby, which normally I don't, but for the sake of this video, might make things a little bit easier. All right, so we're going to do a relatively large dice on the onion. So again, without cutting through that that root end of the onion, we're going to go through. Let's see if I can do this and show you. And you're going to cut long ways into strips. If anybody watches the Food Network or Cooking Channel or anything like that, you've probably seen this technique before. Makes it pretty easy. Again, you can see I'm not a professional dicer. And then again, holding from the root end, kind of tucking your fingers back. What we're going to do is we're just going to then slice down from the top. Like I said, I'm doing a fairly large dice on this because I love onions. And it's always great to get like a nice big chunk of onion when I'm eating my tacos. So then we're going to throw out the actual root piece because that's not very tasty. And then go on to the second. You can see I cut things very nice and evenly, so this half is much smaller than the first half that I've already done. Also, hold your onion a little bit better than I am. I'm trying to show everyone what's going on, so... So our onion is all chopped. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to open up my corn. So with my like 20-year-old can opener, still works. And if my memory served, I'm going to be draining this into the sink. Since we're adding broth in and we're actually not going to be draining the tomatoes, we're going to put that juice right on in there. We don't want things to be over watery for the rice to be mushy, so we need to make sure we drain that well. Again, this is a nice, easy top can, and that will go into the recycling in a moment, but we're gonna not drain our tomatoes. So this is actually a really relatively low prep dish. Once I cut the onions and open up the cans, I'm pretty much ready to go. As far as the cheese, I'm not going to shred that out just now. I'm gonna wait because once the beef and rice and all the other ingredients go in, they're gonna cook for about 20 minutes. So I do have time to shred the cheese in the meantime. So now when you're working with both meats, uncooked meats, and vegetables, we want to be really careful about cross-contamination because if there's something in the beef, we don't want that to get then into our veggies or anything like that. So since I don't have anything more to chop up, it's okay that I open up my beef with my knife. And I'm going to start our pan going at about medium high-ish to cook our beef. My stove heats up really fast. It is electric, so I tend to cook a little bit lower than you would on a gas stove necessarily. So when that gets all heated up, I will then pop the beef in there and get that browning. So I'm gonna just kind of hold my hand over the skillet, see how it's doing. It seems very warm, so we're just gonna pop in our beef. And then we're gonna break it up as we go. Now with ground beef, you generally don't have to put any oil or anything in the pan when we cook it. See, I probably turned my stove on even a little bit too hot. And I'm doing this with the wrong hand, so hang on, I'll be back. Okay, so now that the beef's been drained and put back, we're gonna add the taco seasoning, our corn, our tomatoes, and then I'm going to pour out our 2 cups of beef broth. You'll notice I'm using a glass measuring cup for the broth because liquid is measured in cups differently than solids are. So my rice is not going to be measured in this cup. It's going to be measured in, you know, a more traditional measuring cup that we would think of. So we stop at 2 cups. We add this in, which is going to kind of slow down all that sizzling until that gets going again. And then we're going to open up our rice, which I should have done before, so hang on. So now we're going to add 3/4 of a cup of rice. And this is why we should always read the instructions before we get started, because apparently the first thing I was supposed to cook was the onions and then the beef. And that's not what happened. So we're gonna add our onions in and they're just gonna kind of stew along with everything else. It will taste just fine, but you're not gonna get the same level of flavor you would get if you were doing doing them separately. So yes, I am very much a home chef. So we're gonna go ahead and give everything a good stir. Again, I'm doing this with the wrong hand. Let's see. All right, that's better. What we're gonna do is we are going to get this to come to a boil. And then when it does come to a boil, we are going to turn it down to simmer, cover, and then let it simmer for about 20 minutes. We're gonna check it at the 10-minute mark and give it a stir. Make sure nothing is sticking to the bottom that's not supposed to be sticking to the bottom. So I think everything's gotten good and seasoned in here. And the rice is in there. All right, look good to everybody else? All right, I'm starting to get hungry. Okay, so now we just wait for this to come to a boil. So in a great example of do as I say, not as I do, again, I have done something incorrectly, which, you know, it happens. It's not a big deal. You know, we kind of just make adjustments as we go along. The dish isn't going to be ruined because I forgot to cook the onions ahead of time. So it's quite all right. I also like to make sure my workspace is cleaned up as much as possible as I go. Just so, because I hate cleaning, I hate doing dishes. They're the absolute worst. And if you have somebody in your family who is willing to do the dishes, good for you. All right, so we are boiling here. Smells good already. So we are going to turn down on my stove. I kind of go all the way to the lowest setting to go to a simmer. And then we're gonna cover and set a timer for 10 minutes. And actually set the timer for 10 minutes. And then at that 10-minute mark, we're gonna give it a stir. And in the meantime, I'm gonna go ahead and get my cheese all grated so that that cup and a half of Colby Jack cheese can just shred right up on top. A tip, if you've never shredded cheese before this way, it helps if it's a little bit colder. So if you can, leave that in the fridge until just about before you're ready to shred it up. So with these blocks of cheese, about 1 block is 2 cups shredded. So we need a cup and a half. So we're going to do about 3/4 of this block. That's going to go right up on top and make this cheesy goodness. Once this is done, the other thing that we can also do is put additional taco toppings on top as we like. If you have avocados and you really love avocados, you can slice some of those up and put it right on top of there, or make guacamole. I have kind of a texture thing, so I don't like to eat just cut up avocado, but I love guacamole. It's delicious. I personally am a huge fan of sour cream, and I could probably just eat it with a spoon. So that is going to be one of the things that I put up on top of there. But if you like olives or fresh tomatoes or whatever else it is that you like that's tasty on top of tacos, or Mexican food in general, feel free to add those to the top of your dish. And this is a very tedious process of shredding, but it is delicious and totally worth it. All right, so we should be getting to just about that cup and a half there. I'm not always huge into actually measuring things. Make sure you get all the little pieces of cheese up in there. So I kind of guesstimate with certain things. Then that goes in the sink. This goes in the trash. And the little bit of nub of cheese will go back into the fridge for a tasty snack probably later. So we are just finishing up our first 10 minutes. The lid of my pots get very hot, so I'm going to use a towel. And look at that, it smells so good. Want to give it a little stir. Make sure nothing's sticking to the bottom, because we don't want little bits burned. I will definitely say there has been a time or two where I have left something simmering just a little too warm on the stove and burnt a layer of something to the bottom of it, and that's just no fun. So this looks like it is doing really, really well. That rice is looking good. So recover, maybe, and we're gonna go for another 10 minutes. While we are waiting our last 10 minutes for our skillets to cook and get all delicious, I do want to talk a little bit about mindful eating. So one of the principles of mindful eating is actually knowing when you're hungry and when you're full. And that's something that we kind of lose over time. If you have any like babies in your family, you know that when they're hungry, they let you know. When they're full, they let you know. But we kind of unlearn that as we get older. So it's important to kind of just be mindful and check in with yourself. You know, am I actually hungry? Am I bored right now? And when you're eating as well, you know, am I getting full? Am I like 3/4 full? Have I taken way too many bites of food? We want to see where we're actually at. Another principle of mindful eating is also making sure that we're actually enjoying what we're eating. Because I'm sure we've all had those moments where we're eating something and we just keep eating them. We're like, I don't even like this. So that's something else about mindful eating, is really tasting what it is. And if you're like me and you cook a lot, that can help us, oh, is this like a spice thing that I could tweak and it'll be better for next time? Or it might be, I just don't like this dish. I'm like a huge brownie fiend. So when I make a pan of brownies, I tend to just kind of eat my pan of brownies. But sometimes you get kind of that like metallic-y taste to them, and they're not even good. So I'm like, why am I going to waste, my hunger on something that I don't even enjoy? A couple of weeks ago, I made a cauliflower and cheddar soup. And again, I'm like, I don't know why I made this. I don't like cauliflower. It looked good at the time, I guess. So rather than throw it out or waste it, what I did was I took my immersion blender and I blended it all up into like a puree, and it tasted much better that way to me because I wasn't eating these big chunks of cauliflower. So there's lots of things that we can do that if we're realizing we don't really love something that we've made, to make it more palatable. I'll say, and another thing that we can do is, with me, I'm also not a huge fan of like red sauce, but every now and then I'm like, I'd really love a piece of lasagna. So I make a much smaller portion. Instead of making like a big 9x13, I tend to make it in a loaf pan. And even then I can't really eat the whole of that. So what I'll do is I'll eat about half of it and then freeze the other half. Because when we eat the same thing kind of like every day, we can get a little bit sick of it. So if we can start building up our freezer meals, then we can add a lot more variety into what we're having. And again, we can do this with inexpensive meals too. And if you're out grocery shopping and something is on sale, and even if you don't need it for what you're planning to make this week, popping it in the freezer is always a really good option. Like me, I got a little bit lazy. I bought that ground beef a week ago, and after about 2 days in the fridge, I was like, I'm not going to end up making this soon enough. So I just tossed it in the freezer. So I just had to defrost it before it came out today. So there's a lot of different things that we can do to really kind of tune into whether we're enjoying what we're eating. Are we actually hungry? Are we actually full? And that can just kind of keep us healthy. Another tip about mindful eating is something that we can do is to serve ourselves smaller portions. Because oftentimes if our plate is full, we feel the need to just eat everything that's on our plate. We feel like we're going to be wasteful. I don't know if anybody else grew up like me and had to be part of the clean plate club in order to get dessert every evening. So if we serve ourselves a little bit at a time, not like a tiny minuscule portion, but something that you feel like is probably going to fill you up, but may not, we can always go back for more. And that's something that's really important to remember, that checking in with ourselves, using those mindfulness properties to kind of gauge, okay, am I mostly full? Am I, do I still need maybe another serving or a half serving of this? That's really important to help kind of make sure that we aren't being wasteful and we aren't overeating during this time. So one of the really great things about this dish is not just that it's relatively inexpensive and it's easy to make. One of the reasons I really like it is because it has everything that we need in it. There's so many things going on now about, keto and Atkins and no carbs and all fat. But the reality is our body needs all of those things to run and to run efficiently. So the rice that's our carbohydrate in there. We have the dairy, which is going to be our protein, as well as beef. We've got our veggies with the onions and tomatoes, corn, and again, we've got the fat from the meat and from the dairy in there as well, because fat is actually really important. When we talk about, feeling hungry right after a meal, carbs tend to do that. Our body processes them much more quickly if we don't have anything to kind of slow down that process. But fat, we actually process very, very slowly. So that kind of leads to a more full feeling for longer. So when we're kind of enjoying all these different things, not only are we getting, all the vitamins and minerals and all that good stuff that we need, we're helping ourselves stay full longer, which is going to be helpful for anybody who's trying to maintain weight. But it's also important to know that, we aren't our weight. We aren't, our worth is not measured by a number on a scale. So that's hard based on the kind of conditioning that we get throughout the course of our lives. But it's important to know that eating healthfully is the most important thing. And being healthful in our eating means getting all of those different things: carbs, fats, vegetables, fruits, proteins. They're all needed to make us run, to do what we need to do. When we are studying, when we're working, if we don't have those carbs in our body doesn't have anything to run on. Anybody who's taken bio before, you might have heard of cellular respiration. I'm digging way back to 9th grade here. But what our body turns into energy is glucose, which is sugars. So if we don't have those, we can't we can't function, our brain can't function, our body can't function. So if you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna exercise and do all this great stuff while we are, quarantined, I've got nothing else to do but all this exercise and all this studying, well, we can't do that well if we're not getting the right amount of nutrients into our bodies. And carbs, dairy, fats, proteins, they're, all part of that. We can't live on salad alone. Okay, so our 20 minutes is just about up. Here we go. I'm going to turn off that timer. I'm going to give our meal another look. It looks really good. Give it another stir. Make sure nothing's sticking to the bottom there, because almost all this liquid has been absorbed now. So that's what we wanted. The rice is nice and all the way cooked and everything. So we're just going to give it one last stir. And then make sure it's all kind of spread out nicely. And then we're going to put the cheese up on top of it. I love cheese. Cheese is the best. And then just to melt this cheese, we're gonna put the lid back on for about another 3 minutes, just to get it all melted, and then we are ready to go. Okay, so our 3 minutes is up, and this is what we have been working for the last 25 to 30 minutes. Oh yeah, look at that. That's our beautiful Food Network money shot right there. So we see how it's all nice and bubbly and that cheese is melting and it's gooey and delicious and awesome. So we're gonna make sure we turn off the stove and we're gonna pull it off. Again, like I said, cooking with electric, that does not cool down immediately, so we don't want to burn anything. All right, so we are going to scoop ourselves a little bit of this. This dish should serve about 6, depending on how hungry everybody is. Again, I'm probably going to end up keeping half of these fresh for meals for the next couple days, and then the other half I'll probably end up freezing, just so I can have something tasty and delicious in the future. So I'm going to have some of my sour cream that I love so very much. Again, I got this from the market. Sour cream holds up really well. You can put it in the freezer if you want. It doesn't hold up as well for like fresh eating, but if you cook with sour cream a lot, that's another option that we have. So now I'm going to be using some of my mindful eating principles to enjoy a bite of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at it. What does it look like? Think about how I would describe it to somebody. It looks kind of like there's a fluffy cloud on top of a mishmash of rice and beef and little bit of flecks of tomato and corn, and then you see little gooey parts that are all cheesy. And then you're gonna go ahead and take a good whiff, smell. What does it smell like? Now, I really smell that taco seasoning. And when we're eating mindfully, we can think about, what does this remind us of? Is there a memory that's associated with these smells? For me, nothing in particular stands out because I eat tacos a lot. But it definitely makes my mouth water. It makes me feel very hungry. So we're gonna take a little gooey, cheesy bite. And what we're gonna do, make sure it's not going to burn us. But then what we're gonna do is we're gonna hold it in our mouths for a second. Don't just immediately chew and swallow. Really take a second and taste this. What does it feel like on the inside of your mouth? What does it really taste like on all the different parts of your tongue? Because our taste buds are in different spots on our tongue. So what does this taste like? breaths, and as you chew and you swallow, kind of take your awareness and follow that down to the back of your throat, down your esophagus, and think about, what does that feel like? Is it good? When I'm tasting this, I kind of taste that initial first pop of freshness from the sour cream. And then again, those kind of memories of like all those really good tacos, that salty goodness. It has a really creamy texture to it. Can't necessarily distinguish like the rice in particular, but the beef, the taco seasoning really stands out, and the Colby Jack actually holds up pretty well against it, which I wasn't sure that it would, but I can actually taste like which cheese it is that I'm eating. So that's kind of some tips on how to eat mindfully and to cook mindfully. Cooking is a great stress reliever as long as you find it not stressful. I know some people don't love cooking, so that wouldn't be what they use for stress relief, but it's definitely something that makes me feel good. Probably this evening I'm gonna bake a chocolate cake, so that's very exciting. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me and doing some quarantine cooking. I don't know if you guys like this, maybe I'll do another one. If not, thanks for sticking with me. Have a great night, everyone.